Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, the IB Geography Guru. I'm Peter Davis and I want to take you through some particular topics of population today. Now, a lot of people have contacted me in relation to many topics in the IB syllabus, but a popular one is populations in transition, and in particular the demographic transition model. And it's a good choice in truth. The demographic transition model covers many aspects of population: birth rates, death rates, population growth, aspects relate to different stages for many countries, and so on. It also links to other aspects of population, namely population momentum and the demographic dividend. So the demographic transition model is like a springboard, or a foundation, if you like, for understanding population geography. So we're going to take a look at those 5 stages, remember, and there will also be a question at the end, typical IB question. Pause the video at the time to see if you can answer that particular question, and we will then go through an answer afterwards. So I hope you enjoy the video. I'll be back with you a little bit later, and do remember, geography rocks. So here we go then. Paper 2, Unit 1, Changing Population and Places. Now, the first thing I think will be very useful for all of you is to look at some definitions, because these can come up in an examination question, and as a result, we all want to know how to give a clear definition to get our 1 or 2 marks or whatever it is. So first of all, the CDR, or the crude death rate. Simply the number of deaths per 1,000 population in any given year. The CBR, which is the crude birth rate. And this is the number of live births per 1,000 population in any given year. Population growth. The increase in population size over time. Infant mortality rate is the number of infant deaths below the age of 1 divided by the number of live births times 1,000. The natural increase is the difference between the CBR and the CDR, and natural decrease, which you'll find will only occur in stage 5 of the demographic transition model, the difference between the CDR and the CBR. So let's look at the model itself then. So the demographic transition model, there's the death rate, and there is the birth rate. The line there depicts stage 1, which is also known as the high stationary stage, and the blue line at the bottom is the population growth. As you can see, very little at that particular time. Now also look at the scales. They are very important. If you were to draw this in an exam, they would be expected to be marked on your diagram. It represents birth rate and death rate per 1,000, and it goes up at the high stage to about 40 to 45. If you're looking at low values, I suppose you're going down to maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. Time frame, whether you're dealing with one country or you're dealing with a whole region, will vary from maybe about 100 to 300 years, something of that nature. So you can see in stage 1, the death rate is high and fluctuating. Why is that so? Well, here's the first answer. It could be due to war. Particularly for many countries in Europe, they were violent times in the 16th, 17th, 18th century and so on. And even LICs today, even though they may not be at stage 1, because no country is at stage 1 today, there is a lot of internal conflict and genocide and so on. So war could be a factor as to why that death rate is so high and fluctuating. Then there's famine. Back in the day, clearly, lack of food supplies could be a problem. They may be affected by climate lack of rainfall, perhaps disease, locusts and so on, perhaps the quality of the soil, all led to a lack of food. And with large numbers of people beginning to grow, particularly in the agricultural areas at this time, many may have perished due to famine. And then the third one, of course, is disease, still very prevalent in LICs today. But back in stage one, then many would die from diseases that we would associate as minor today and can easily be cured, not back then. And life expectancy could be, early 30s if you're looking at some countries, due to the impact that disease might have. So then on to stage two, known as the early expanding stage. And as you can see, there is a rapid increase in population at this time. Birth rates, reasonably steady, still at a high level, but there's a dramatic fall in the death rate at this particular time. Again, why is that? Now, sometimes there's confusion in examination answers as to reasons why stage two has a fall in death rate. People tend to come in with better doctors, better medicines, better hospitals, better patient care, and so on. Not true. If you're looking at stages 4 and 5, absolutely. But when you're looking at stage 2, we're dealing with other things, such as better sanitation. Still a big killer today in some parts of the world. And if you have dirty hands, if your sanitation is very poor, for example, if you are bathing and drinking from the same river as everyone else, washing clothes in the same river, you're going to have huge sanitation problems, and many die due to lack of sanitation. Likewise, cleaner water becomes an important part as well. Back in the day, again, water would be drunk, very unclean, disease all over the place, and there's no doubt about it that fresh and clean water was a key factor in reducing the death rate at stage 2. And of course, sanitation and water are very closely linked. Then even an improved diet could come into play, a little bit more balance. We're not talking about, the veganism and so on, what we're dealing with today, but a bit more fruit, a bit more vegetables and so on, would allow people to survive illness, in fact, with a better diet, but also give them a better balance as well. So that could also be a factor why the death rate has decreased. And yes, there would be some basic medical improvement as well that you'll be looking at in stage 2, which would help reduce the death rate at that particular time. Now, stage 3 is an important one, simply because it can link to many other aspects of population geography, which the IB deals with later, such as population momentum and the demographic dividend. But here, the dramatic reference that you can look at, of course, is that fall in the birth rate, rapidly decreasing. And again, this is another stage where people tend to give the wrong answer. They're asked, why does the birth rate fall so rapidly at stage 3? And we get, women are working, much better contraception. Well, there was, but not to the degree we know it today. Basically looking at later marriages and all this sort of thing, not relevant at this point in time. Now, you can see the growth rate increasing, but does level out. But what factors are we looking at here for that decrease in birth rate? First of all, very importantly, I think, a lower infant mortality rate. In the past, women would need to give birth to maybe 15 or 16 children in order that 5 or 6 survive. Now, with a lower infant mortality, that would not be the case. So that has decreased quite enormously. Then education for children at this particular point in time. They will no longer be needed at home. They will go to school. They will become knowledgeable. They may get degrees. They want to move elsewhere. And as such, they will be inclined to have fewer children, because what we tend to find, the more educated the population, the fewer children they will tend to have. Children then become an economic liability and not an asset. An asset they were before. They would fetch water, they would do the household chores, they would look after their parents in old age, they would tend the fields. Not anymore. And as such, they become an economic liability and the overall rate will go down. And let's not forget also here we could look at government policy, such as China's one-child policy, which could have an enormous impact on decreasing the birth rate at stage 3. Now, stage 4, that, by the way, was the late expanding stage. Now, stage 4, the low stationary stage, and we can see population growth now has leveled out. What are the factors here that affect the birth rate? Well, later marriage does come into play here. Women and men perhaps want to enjoy their single years. They want to enjoy some degree of, I suppose, materialism. And maybe they want to get married a bit later before they commit. But of course, a later marriage means probably fewer children. Working women. Women now are well educated. And do they want to just throw away their degree and get married at, say, 22, 23? Probably not. They can now make their own decisions. They are now financially independent of men, which is also important. So they may decide to get a job and then consider marriage a little bit later, again with a decrease in the birth rate. Then there's fertility problems. Many couples feel once they get married, they can have as many children as they like. Not the case. 25 to 30% of all newly married couples have some sort of infertility problem. Then these stages will have an aging population, 22% over 60, and that, of course, as well will relate to a lower birth rate. And then materialism can be represented in a number of ways. The example I've given here are the so-called 5 Cs. This relates in particular to Singapore, but it could relate to any particular country. And I think said with tongue-in-cheek that women in Singapore would only marry a man if he had the 5 Cs, namely cash, car, condominium, credit card, and a country club. Now, take of that what you will, but it's in the folklore, if you like, of Singapore. But there's no doubt that people maybe consider some form of materialism before they decide to get married. So it may be a factor. And then increasing divorce rates. They've no doubt gone up. It's easier to get a divorce now. You can even do it online. And as a result, then you will find that people maybe are not sure whether or not they're going to stay together or perhaps have fewer children. And then, of course, there is family planning. It was introduced, in a sense, in stage 3, but now much more advanced, of course, with family planning clinics, all sorts of advice, all sorts of contraceptives that you could use. Now, the birth rate, as you can see, is fluctuating at that particular point. It's going up. Now, what are the reasons for that? Well, they are called baby booms or baby boomers. The classic example is after World War II. Between 1945 and 1945, there was a surge in the population. But you also have other reasons, like, for example, after the power cuts due to the coal miners' strike in the UK, there was a minor baby boom. And if we're looking at Chinese societies, then a dragon year, which comes around once every 12 years, is seen to be very auspicious. That will then lead to a minor baby boom in these societies as well. Now, in terms of death rate, of course, we are looking at advanced medical developments now. If we just take heart disease on its own, you can get stents, you can get bypasses, you can get transplants, something that was unheard of like 30 to 40 years ago. And of course, advanced medicines in many other areas as well, different types of cancers, and so on and so forth. And then stage 5, not recognized initially in the earlier model because it was founded in 1945, but nevertheless, we see a decrease in the population here. At this situation, the birth rate is well below replacement level, normally identified at 2.1, while in some countries it can be 1.1, 1.2, very low. And with the death rate, of course, it's an increasingly aging population. That's why the death rate is higher. Some people say, well, what with all the medicine, why is the death rate higher? It's simply because there's an increasing proportion of elderly in the population. So by that very nature, they're more likely to die than younger people. And that's why the death rate is actually higher at this particular point in time. Now, the line you see there is what we call natural increase. It's simply the difference between the birth rate and the death rate. So in this case, we have a birth rate of about 38 per 1,000 and a death rate of about 19 per 1,000. So the actual natural increase will be 19 per 1,000. Now, the demographic transition model has links to other fairly important models. There's Rostow's model, which is based on industry and economic development, and that, just like the demographic transition, has 5 stages. Now, if you're doing food and health as one of your options, you will come across the epidemiological transition. This as well is linked to the demographic transition. It again has 5 stages, and you can trace different types of diseases at each stage. Diseases of affluence, for example, will be found from stage 3 onwards, and we'll briefly mention a few details about this in a moment's time. Then we have 3, Zielinski's mobility transition. This deals with migration and circulation over a period of time, and for this particular model, there are 4 stages. Then we have what's called the demographic dividend. This is really important. It's been introduced into the new syllabus by the IB, and it's based on social, economic, and political circumstances, and can be identified at stage 3 of the demographic transition, and has 5 characteristics. Population momentum, again, a demographic factor, also can be found at stage 3. And there are 3 processes. And then population pyramids, which align also with the demographic transition model on the basis that there is a different shape for each different stage. So, for example, the traditional pyramid shape we would normally associate with stage 2, a top-heavy pyramid shape would normally be stage 4 or 5 of the demographic transition model. Of the death rate as we get into stages 4 and 5 are diseases of affluence, and a lot of that of course relates to an unhealthy diet. Here you can see, although there's fish on the plate, you've got mushy peas, you've got French fries by abundance, you've got bread and butter, ketchup, not very good. Equally, the good old English breakfast that you can see here, many call it a heart attack on a plate, and not surprising, because look at this. You've got egg, high cholesterol, a hash brown, mushrooms, sausages, fried bread, bacon, tomatoes, and baked beans. And add to that toast and butter as well. It's not healthy. You don't want to be eating these every single morning. So let's get to our IB question, a typical IB question. Explain 2 reasons why the demographic transition model is unreliable as a predictive method. 2 plus 2. Now, pause the video here if you want to answer the question yourself, and then see a bit later whether or not you have the correct answer. Okay, let's look at some of the answers you could give then in order to get your 2 plus 2. And again, there are no definitive versions of this, to be honest with you, but you do want to write 2 or 3 sentences here for 2 marks. 1 sentence would be insufficient. So, reason 1, the model does not incorporate any form of migration, forced or voluntary, as migration is a major determinant of a country's population, its gender, growth, and age range, etc. This is a very limiting factor. For example, it is estimated that 14% of the UK population are migrants. For the UAE, it is around 80%. So any model without migration in cannot be predictive. Right, reason 2. The model is Eurocentric, and the demographics of Europe are very different to the rest of the world. Equally, between European countries, there will be vast differences from those that are industrialized early to those that remain more agrarian, for example, between the UK and Spain. So it's a Eurocentric model, can't be applied worldwide. And even within Europe, it won't apply because some countries, again, Europe or Germany or France, will have industrialized much more quickly than perhaps Spain or Portugal, Italy, and so on. So again, it can't be predicted. Reason 3, the role of governments. Now you'll find in a lot of aspects to questions from the IB, governments will play an important part of an answer. Now the DTM does not take into account government policies in relation to population policies. This can make a dramatic difference both between and within stages, along with either a prolonged or limited time frame. A good example would be anti-natalist policies such as China's one-child policy in 1979, which dramatically reduced the time frame of stage 3. And of course, it also brought about this dramatic fall in births as well, brought about solely by the government. Now, we don't know for other countries whether governments will step in or not, but the DTM does not incorporate that as a factor. And then reason 4, the model was developed by Frank W. Notstein in 1945. There have been numerous demographic changes since that day. A stage 5 has now been identified, where there will actually be a natural decrease in population. There has been rapid developments in birth control methods, along with gender equality and new diseases such as COVID-19. All will have significant impacts on birth and death rates, so the model is essentially static. So any two of those 4 reasons in the detail that has been given here will be good enough to get you your 4 marks. But remember, your answer, even for 2 marks, must not just be 1 sentence, because it won't be sufficient. So there you go. I hope that was helpful. So there we have it, the demographic transition model. Now I hope that's helped you in some areas of population geography. I know it's an area which is quite an important one, and I think a key aspect of geography to remember is the interrelationships that we see. Your population ties in with global warming, it ties in with resources, it ties in with many of your options, and indeed if you're doing paper 3 in terms of the HL syllabus, it ties in with so much of that as well. And that's important if you want to do well in geography. It's these interrelationships that are very important for you to understand. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, much appreciated. Do remember online tuition is also available, and you can contact me at my email address of ibgeographyguru@yahoo.com. Until then, adios.